My guest at this time is retired U.S. Navy Captain Chuck Nash. For many years, he was a Fox News military analyst, and you still see him commenting on national security affairs there quite often. He joins us today to react to President Trump's decision to withdraw U.S. forces from Syria, saying that ISIS has been defeated and that Russia, Iran, and Syria can successfully fight any remaining ISIS remnants. And Captain Nash, thanks so much for being with us.
Well, my pleasure, Greg. Nice to be with you.
Well, a lot of people caught off guard by this, and opinions are strong, even inside the president's own party. A lot of Republicans up on Capitol Hill say this is a disastrous move that damages our credibility and smacks of President Obama leaving Iraq in 2011. On the other side, you've got some of the more libertarian streaks of the party, like Rand Paul, Mike Lee. They're thrilled, saying we can't stay forever. We can't be the world's policeman. And, oh, by the way, Congress never approved our forces being there in the first place. So how do you see it?
Well, let's start with the last part. No, Congress never did approve that. And in fact, you had a country that was involved in a civil war, and the United States, without any, international rule, just decided we were going to go into a sovereign country, Syria, that was fighting a civil war to fight a third-party enemy, ISIS. So at that point, the congressmen are exactly right. The other part of the question about we can't stay there forever. No, think back to Desert Storm, the first Gulf War, when George H.W. Bush said our mission is to go into Kuwait and throw the Iraqis out of Kuwait, to liberate Kuwait. Well, we did that in blinding time. And there were a lot of people saying, well, keep going to Baghdad. No, that's mission creep. And a lot of people, me included, said, no, he did the right thing. This was after Vietnam, when mission creep bogged us down into a horrible situation in Vietnam. And we really did not have the political will to finish that. So Bush was smart in that he set clear objectives, gave tremendous commander's guidance to his military people. Off they went, they executed it, and it was done. Now, we later went back into Baghdad and again won that war, but lost the peace.
Captain Nash, there's a couple of issues that could arise from this, of course. Some worry that the fragments of ISIS could reconvene, and since that doesn't seem to be the biggest concern on the part of the Assad regime or the Russians or the Iranians, that could rise again, maybe not to the extent that it did before, but there's still a possibility. And then also on another issue that you and I have talked about many times, and that's the hegemonic ambitions of Iran, which, of course, has very close ties to Syria. So
right.
How concerned are you about those things, and what's the best way to address them if we're going to address them?
Yeah, the Iranians are an issue. They are a big issue. But here again, you have the Syrian government that never really folded. Bashar al-Assad is still there. In fact, he's being rehabilitated by the Arab League, having just had a visit by some Arab leadership. They're welcoming him back to the fold because they realize his government will be sustained. It is going to stand. And at that point, he and his government and his military forces, with the help of the Iranians and the Russians, are going to take care of the rebels, of which the YPG, the People's Protection Units, are a big part. Now, they're allies of the United States. We've been supporting them. That's what the 2,000 troops have been in there doing, which is a train and assist mission. So when we pull those people out, what's different from what President Trump is doing than what President Barack Obama did was he advertised a pullout some point down the road. Well, that just gave the enemy time to prepare. What Trump has done is pulled the rug out from under him and said, we're pulling those 2,000 troops back. Well, now think about it. That's 2,000 boots on the ground, so to speak. That's Title 10. That's U.S. military. He said nothing about special operations people who are chopped Title 50 doing clandestine and covert operations. So you could have CIA paramilitary or U.S. Special Forces chopped to CIA under Title 50 to be there to call in air support. Nobody said anything about pulling back air cover. So there are a lot of options here that the President and that the National Command Authority can use so that this is not okay, pack up, go home, and let everybody fight it out. I don't think that's the intent.
We're talking with retired U.S. Navy Captain Chuck Nash. And Captain, on the other side of Syria, we've got Turkey, which certainly has some territorial and hegemonic ambitions of its own. You have discovered that Turkey may have played a role here with President Erdogan in helping convince President Trump this is the right move to make.
Yeah, he made a speech on November 27th in which he said that there are no real ISIS fighters left in Syria, that there are just some gangs that are in there stirring things up, and essentially, I think, downplaying the existence, or the quantity at least, and quality of what remains of ISIS, which, would lead the United States to think, well, that's why we're there. We're not there to meddle in the middle of a Syrian civil war, for goodness sakes. Our job was, like Bush said, throw the Iraqis out of Kuwait, liberate Kuwait. What did President Trump say? We're going to crush ISIS. Okay, well, if ISIS is crushed, how long are we going to stay after mission accomplished, after we've achieved our objectives? The answer is you don't want to stay a day longer, and you don't want to do a gradual pullout because your forces are weakened and weakened and weakened as it goes, and they're more vulnerable. You just want to do it. But like I said, that is probably going to be the Title 10 element, not the Title 50, folks.
Explain for our listeners how it benefits Erdogan if we're not there, and particularly the relationship, if you can call it that, between the Turks and the Kurds, because there's a lot of people who are critical of this decision saying that we're hanging the Kurds out to dry here. Yeah,
the Kurds that are of issue right now and the main focus of the Erdogan government in Turkey are those who are called east of the Euphrates. If you look at where the Euphrates River comes down from Turkey through Syria and into Iraq, it sort of cuts the upper one-third, northeast one-third of Syria is on the east side of the Euphrates. That is the territory where the Erdogan government is desperate not to have those Kurds link up with the Kurds in northern Iraq, because they are very concerned that they are trying to reestablish a Kurdistan which the Kurds see as their ethnic geography goes all the way up well into Turkey. So they already have an internal problem with Kurds, and they don't want any more of that happening, especially when you start looking at the YPG, which the Erdogan government considers supporters of and an element of the PKK, which they have determined is a terrorist group.
So if we're not there, other than perhaps paramilitary, as you mentioned, and some other special forces, what's the best way to establish policy? Because I assume we do want to protect the Kurds, even if we're not necessarily in favor of a formal Kurdish state, and also obviously foster as much stability in the region as is humanly possible.
Well, in Iraq, the Kurds are the people we should be supporting in northern Iraq. We have gained some relationship with the Kurds in northern Syria because they have been the bulwark of who we have been supporting up there against ISIS. They've been doing the vast majority of the fighting against ISIS. So we are in kind of a betwixt and between. We can't let them hang out to dry. So that's where the relationship has to build with Turkey. And believe it or not, despite the press, our relationship with Turkey has been getting better as of late. So I think by making this pullout, that gives the Turks more free rein for mischief, if you will, with the YPG, with the Kurds in northern Syria. But at the same time, it gives us some diplomatic effort that we can put forth with the Erdogan government saying, look, you had a problem with us being there and supporting them. Now, don't take advantage of them because we can reverse this tomorrow. So now let's deal with this. Why don't you finish mopping up the ISIS elements that are in there? Let the Syrian government and their Iranian allies deal with what they call the rebels, which are the Syrian Democratic Forces. That's going to be a problem for those people too. But this whole thing has to wind down. You've got too many players in too small a space, And we're lucky that nothing really bad has happened with Russian airplanes mixing with U.S. aircraft and Syrian aircraft and Turks. And we have been very fortunate to this date that nothing really serious has gone wrong, because the potential has been just horrendous.
So obviously, and to no surprise, things remain complicated on a number of different levels with the Russians, the Iranians, the Turks, the Kurds, and others as well. But before we let you go, Chuck, I don't want to miss the forest for the trees here, and that's the fact that we have, in fact, decimated to a large extent ISIS compared to where it was just a couple of years ago. A lot of folks have chalked that up to a more reasonable rules of engagement for our military personnel. From what you know, why have we been far more successful in the past couple of years than we were shortly before that?
We unshackled. You're right. We took off the restrictive rules of engagement. We put the right kind of people on the ground, and we let the right people do the fighting, backed up by the right people. It's been much smarter the way we've done it. And if you want to look at tonnage of bombs, drastically different from what happened during the Obama administration. So we allowed our special operations people working with fighters on the ground, which you have to do. You can't win a war from the air. You can support a ground war from the air and win, but you can't win it from the air. But what we did was, by using air power wisely, decisively, and one might say massively, we have, with precision, supported those ground troops and rolled ISIS back from, like 1% of the landmass that they used to cover.
It's an impressive accomplishment in a relatively short period of time, and so our forces and their allies, indigenous to that region, certainly deserve a lot of credit as well. And
if I might, Greg, and they also now share the responsibility to wrap this ISIS thing up once and for all, because it's not to their benefit to allow that to fester and possibly grow back. They need to pursue these guys and crush them once and for all and be done with it.
When you say they, does that mean the Syrian government?
I mean the Iraqis, the Syrians, the Turks, and there are some other players involved in that. The Iranians are really no friends of those guys. The only reason the Iranians would go against or would back any ISIS thing is because ISIS and the Iranians see us as we're the common enemy.
So much to understand, and you've explained it so well. Chuck, as always, great to have you with us. Thanks for your time today, and Merry Christmas to you, sir.
Same to you, Greg. Thank you.
Retired U.S. Navy Captain Chuck Nash, for many years a Fox News military analyst. You still see him there frequently discussing national security headlines like this one. I'm Greg Columbus reporting for Radio America.